Okay, solving quadratics method 3. Recall method 1 was factoring. If you could factor it, and solve it that way. Method 2 is using square roots. Square roots only work if there's no linear term, there's no bx term. So if there's only an x squared and a constant, you could use square roots. Method 3 is called the quadratic formula. It's kind of your last resort. Okay, if you can't factor, you can't use a square root, use the quadratic formula. It is kind of long, it is kind of time consuming. But it works for every single quadratic problem. Okay. So every problem can be solved using the quadratic formula. But again, because it's long, you don't want to do it for every problem. Okay, if you could factor. If you could use square roots, use square roots. All right, the quadratic formula needs to be in standard form. It has to be in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. If it's not in that form, you're going to have to rearrange your equation to get it into that form. Okay. All right, now the formula. You will have to memorize this. I know in quarantine, you could always look at your notes, but at some point you will have to memorize it. The quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b, okay, or negative b, plus or minus a big square root, and under the square root is b squared minus 4ac. Okay, that's the top. The bottom is just simple 2 times a. Okay, so the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, the whole thing divided by 2a. Okay. Now again, that opposite of b or negative b, okay, just whatever b is, the opposite is going to be the opposite sign. So you got negative, you make it positive. You got a positive, you make it negative. Okay, but that's it. You memorize that formula and it's just plugging stuff in from there. Okay. So let's do our first problem here. We're first going to want to, first looking at this problem, you got x squared minus 6x minus 16. That's a factorable problem. We know how to factor that. Okay, you're just finding what multiplies to negative 16 and adds to positive 6, or negative 6, and it's negative 8 and positive 2. Okay, so we know the answer to this problem. We don't have to use the quadratic formula for this one. This is one where you would want to factor. Okay, so we know the answer is going to be 8 and negative 2, but let's see if we could get that with the quadratic formula. So we'll first identify a, b, and c. A is 1, b is negative 6, c is negative 16. Okay, and then we're just plugging things into the formula. Start with the opposite of b. B is negative 6, the opposite of that's positive 6. Plus or minus, big square root, negative 6 squared, b squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1. Okay. So 4 times 1 times negative 16, which is c. Okay, so again, just plugging in, we have the 3 values, we're just plugging them into the spots. And then the whole thing divided by 2 times a, 2 times 1. Okay, just going to change that 2 to black. So anything in red is just what you plug in. Anything in black is what is it part of the formula. All right, so let's simplify. The 6 is going to stay, plus or minus. Negative 6 squared inside is 36. And then multiply those 3 numbers together. Include the negative 4. So negative 4 times 1 times negative 16 becomes plus 64. And then multiply the bottom. 2 times 1 is 2. Okay. All right, simplify more. Add those numbers together under the radical. 36 plus 64 is 100. Okay, leave everything else the same. And then the square root of 100 we know is 10. Okay, so we're going to have 2 answers here. We're going to have 6 plus 10 divided by 2. 16 over 2 is 8. And then we're going to have 6 minus 10 divided by 2. Negative 4 over 2 is negative 2. So those are our 2 answers, which again, we already knew that because this was a factorable problem. Okay, so the answers from factored form match what we got from quadratic formula. Again, factored form in this problem is easier. Okay. This one's also factorable. 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. It is factorable, but you'd have to guess and check or do factor by grouping. So this one's a better candidate for quadratic formula. Identify a, b, and c. A is 2, b is negative 5, c is negative 3. The opposite of b, opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. Plus or minus, big square root. That's a bad one, big one. Negative 5 squared minus 4 times a times c. We just plug in. Negative 5 squared minus 4 times the a value, 2, times the c value, negative 3. the whole thing divided by 2 times a, 2 times 2, which is going to be 4. Okay, so write it out and then simplify. We're going to simplify everything under the radical first. So the 5 is going to stay out front. 5 plus or minus the square root. 5 squared, negative 5 squared is 25, minus, and again, do negative 4 times 2 times negative 3. Okay, I always include that negative with the 4. That gives you positive 24, so it changes it from minus to plus 24, and then the whole thing divided by 4. Okay. 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 divided by 4. The square root of 49 is 7. Okay, so now we're going to split it up into our two answers. We're going to have 5 plus 7 and then 5 minus 7, both divided by 4. Oh, this would be a 4. 5 plus 7 divided by 4 is 12 over 4, which is 3. And then 5 minus 7 is negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 4 is negative 1/2. Simplify your fractions. Okay, two answers. Now again, that one was factorable. But again, maybe you're not as good with factoring as you thought, so you might do the quadratic formula for that one. All right, and this last one's not in standard form. It's not in ax squared plus bx plus c, so you're going to have to subtract 4 over. Okay. Once you're in that standard form, then identify a, b, and c. A is 1, b is 2, c is negative 4. This one is not factorable. Okay. Nothing's going to give you negative 4 and add to 2. So you have to use a quadratic formula for this one. Plug in what you know. The opposite of b is negative 2, plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 4, and the whole thing divided by 2 times negative 1. Okay. Simplify the inside. 2 squared is 4, plus 16. Okay, leave everything else the same. Okay. And then at this point, so you got the square root of 20 under there. Now what a lot of people want to do is they want to cross off the 2 and the 2. You cannot do that. You can only do that if every term on the top has a 2. Okay. So you can't just cross off the negative 2 over 2 and leave you with the square root of 20. You can't do that. What we can do instead is simplify the square root of 20. Square root of 20 can be rewritten. Okay. You could also use this as a factor tree. You could rewrite the square root of 20 as the square root of, that should be a 4, square root of 4 times the square root of 5. Now the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of 5 is square root of 5. So it simplifies the 2 square root of 5. Okay. Now you can cross off those 2's. Okay, because there's each term has a 2 on top, and you got the 2 on the bottom. So that there's a 1 out front, that value doesn't go away. So you got negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. That is your exact form answer. Now you could also approximate it. The square root of 5 is approximately 2.24. Okay. So you could do negative 1 plus 2.24. And you could do negative 1 minus 2.24 to get your two approximate answers. Now again, it's fine if you leave it in exact form, but again, we are finding x-intercepts and having the approximates a little better. So 1.24 and approximately negative 3.24. Okay. All right, so again, that's the quadratic formula. You will have to memorize that formula. Opposite of b, or plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.